Barbara, thank you for letting me come today and talk to you about your life in Lafayette. Would you please give me your full name and spell it?
Barbara Franke Boyle, and it's spelled B-A-R-B-A-R-A, Barbara, Franke, F-R-N-K-E, and then Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E.
Barbara, when and where were you born?
I was born in Oakland, California, June the 13th, 1927.
And how long have you lived in Lafayette?
Well, we figured it out, came out when I was 10 years old, and I'll be 84 this year, so it's like 70-something years, roughly 73 or 4 or something like that.
That's a nice long time to be here. And you just told me you were 10 when you came.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us where you lived.
Well, right across the creek. And what happened was my dad had his business in Walnut Creek. He owned the Walnut Creek Cannery, which used to be where Target is now. And they talked about years of moving out to the ranch. We used to come out summer vacations and weekends. And then we came to the ranch permanently, built the house in 1937. And lived the first year while it was being built in a little cottage here. And so that's when we came. And why we came was my dad's business was in Walnut Creek.
Could you give me a little more idea of where the house was and a little bit about where you live now?
Well, in 1922, my dad bought, I believe it was 20 acres. And this is all, my house is on part of the 20 acres, a small part. And each of my brothers had a plot, and other than that, the parcels were divided before my father's death in 1947.
So you're still living on part of the family
right,
place.
Right. And when we first moved out here, came out summer vacations, I think, we didn't have any mud water. We had wells.
Oh.
And it was very, very, I don't want to say primitive, but very countryish then. And there was a ranch up where Los Erebus is now, and they used to drive the cattle down Happy Valley, and it was kind of interesting, but we'd run up when we knew they were coming to close the gates. The cattle didn't come in the yard.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
And when did they stop doing those cattle drives?
Well, Dr. Musser, who originally bought some land from my dad, bought the acreage off of Los Erebus to the left as you're going up Upper Happy Valley Road. And that was undeveloped, but he started to develop it. And I think the first house that was in there was in the 30s up in the hill. And there was a model home. But before that time, they had someone had a cattle ranch there. They didn't own the land, to my knowledge. They were renting it. And I remember going up and watching them brand the cattle. That was much fun.
Well, it sounds like you were out in the country for
right.
sure.
That's right. We were.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the neighborhood? Is your family home that was built in 1937? Is it
still stands? And we actually had a very nice pool and stuff. which was built before the house. And so summer vacations, we would come out, we would swim, and my dad had a number of picnics through the creek. They had tables down in the creek, and various groups would come in and picnic. The Shriners and the different, I think it was Hagstrom stores, and would have picnics down there. They were friends of my dad's. It wasn't a commercial thing. It was just friends that he knew.
Uh-huh. It sounds like a park, actually, almost.
It was real interesting, yes.
And in 1937, when you actually moved out to the house, or the house was being built, about how many families were in the Happy Valley area?
About a dozen, I think.
About a dozen.
There weren't very many families at all. And in fact, there was this signpost in one of the Lafayette books where they showed a picture of it, the various people in the valley, and I think there are probably maybe a dozen. The McGuires, the Mulligans, the Malleys, that.
And Barbara, tell me a little bit more about your neighborhood. You talked about the ranch close by. Were there a number of ranches, or were some of these homes summer homes, or how would you describe the neighborhood at that time?
It's tough because it was a variety of things. The neighbor to my left, as we're sitting here, the whole area was tenant farmed by a man, and it was owned by a brother and sister named Neiswanger, and they never lived out here, but the Ratkoviches lived there and raised pigs, and they had used to bring us apple cider from his trees, fruit. That was good stuff. And then there'd be people that lived here, and they came in the summertime or weekends. But there are also some permanent residents, the McGuires and so on and so forth, and later the Gummos, and that was their home. And they weren't farmers because it wasn't large tracts of land in many cases. My dad had pear and apple trees, and the pears were sold to Felice and Pirelli, and when the extra pears he took to his friends, he'd load up the station wagon and take 50-pound loads of pears to people. And so they weren't, my dad was, I wouldn't term a farmer, but we had the trees and he took care of them, and he didn't personally take care of them.
Barbara, tell me a little bit about the roads and
the roads weren't paved. They were, there used to be a little bridge here now that's filled in with a culvert and stuff, and it's a roadway. And it was always kind of funny because they had a early Happy Valley Improvement Association way back then. I think it was reactivated, or whether it stood all the years, but I remember one time they were going to have a meeting, and we had what we called a dance pavilion, which was a separate building, and it had a beautiful white pine dance floor, fireplace at one end, and so that a lot of times people had parties there. And anyhow, then the pavilion, they sometimes had meetings like Happy Valley Improvement Association, and we always laughed because one time invited one of the county supervisor, and the day before he was to come to the meeting, we got the potholes in our road fixed. So, but the potholes had been sitting there quite a while before they got around to fixing them. And anyhow, it was a quiet area, not farming as such that I recall. They had
Barbara, you now are a ways from downtown Lafayette. How did you, back then, how did you get into town?
our folks, if we were going to school, our folks had to take us, except that Mr. Blackwood was the first one to run the school bus system. And he had, before he had his bus, he took us by his own car. Sometimes there weren't that many people in Happy Valley. And he had a few kids, and he'd drive us to school. But that was the main thing is that our folks mostly took us to grammar school.
Now, was this Lafayette school the same?
Yeah, I went to Lafayette grammar school, and they didn't have Stanley School at that time. You went to 8th grade in Lafayette grammar school, and then you went on to high school. And of course, Oakland was built, I believe, in 40. First class was 41, and it was, really the first one in the district, first school in the district.
Tell me about your grammar school first, what you remember about it.
Remember Mrs. Christian, who taught music. I came going into the 4th grade, and I have two brothers, twins, and they're 14 months older than I am. And they didn't have high and low grades out here that they did in town. So they stuck them in the 4th grade too, but we were put in different rooms. And then we went to grammar school. As I say, the grammar school went to the 8th grade then. No intermediate school. And our 8th grade teacher was the superintendent of the district of Lafayette School District, as well as the 8th grade teacher and principal of Lafayette School, Mr. Ellis. So he was my 8th grade teacher.
Barbara, were the classes similar to what children are taking today, or like in 4th and 5th grade, what kind of things would you be doing?
Okay, they had 4th grade was with one teacher, and maybe she had part of the 3rd grade. And then later, I know when I was in 4th grade, they moved me in there were 8 of us 4th graders, all of the 5th grade, and part of the 6th in the one room. And then by the time we got to 7th and 8th, 7th and 8th, I don't remember the 7th grade being in with us in the 8th grade. And and there were, various teachers, and all pretty good ones. I don't think that they had as many things as they do today. In grammar school, I think, their schools are much more accelerated than they were then.
Do you remember about how many hours a day you would go to school, and did you have recesses, and did you have a lunch?
We had a lunch break, we had recesses. We went pretty much the same hours, and you asked how did we get there. our parents had to take us places. Or, if they forgot to come on time, we'd walk home.
Oh.
Because I remember walking home, waiting for my mother, and she didn't show up, so I walked home.
Barbara, did they have a library at your school?
I don't recall that we had a library. I remember going to the Lafayette Library, Mrs. Van Meter, and with the librarian, and it was a little room in the town hall that time. Now, there was a time before that, I understand the library was where the telephone place was. But when I was in school, it was in a room in the main floor of the town hall, and it was just a small room. And to get it to, after I read all the kids' books, I had to bring a note from my parents to go into the adult fiction. And then they built the library that they had an old library. Then they had a nicer building which still stands. Then they have the building now where they start.
Do you have any memories of Mrs. Van Meter? Can you describe her to us?
She was a very nice lady, and I remember her wearing a hat with a brim and flowers all along the brim. And she'd make recommendations of what would be a good one to read.
And did she always wear that hat? I mean, was she always dressed up quite a lot?
She had the hat on a lot of the time, and she was a very nice lady.
And so she helped a lot of children pick out books.
Well, there weren't a lot that went over to that library when it was in the town hall.
Oh, okay, mostly from your school, probably.
Yeah. I don't know where other people came. I never saw many people in there.
Did any people still ride their horses?
Well, my dad had horses.
Did any ride their horses to school? And then let's go back and talk to you about your horses.
No, nobody rode horses to school.
Tell me a little bit about your horses. Did you ride or?
Not very much. Mm-hmm. But I would say my dad rode mostly. It was his hobby. And my mother rode on a very few occasions. And but my dad's horse was Jimmy. And my mother's horse supposedly was Delight, but she didn't ride her very often. But with Jimmy, my dad had cut apples and take them over and feed him. One time, Jimmy stopped eating. He couldn't figure out why. He called the vet. And Jimmy had decided he was going to eat some of the rose bushes. And he had a rose thorn about 5-6 inches crossways in his straight throat. And that the vet reached in and took that out.
Oh, and that was what was wrong with him.
So Dad had to have an extension built to the fence so he couldn't eat roses anymore.
Let's stay with your schools for a little bit. Tell me anything more you can remember about grammar school or any of your special friends, and then talk about high school.
Grammar school. Well, we talked about some of the people. Richard Stanley was in there. There was a gal named Ardell Smith. There was my brother's I'm thinking of the 8th grade now, and I have a picture I could probably Rasmussen, Frank King. The Kings lived up the hill there. But, then in high school you had some of the same. At Oakland, there was, in our class, graduating class, I think there were 111.
Oh, now were you the first class?
No. See, they finished the high school. First class was in 71, and I graduated 1975. Now you got to remember there were a lot of kids that didn't graduate then. They were in the war. My brothers went in the Navy, and one died when he was in the service.
Tell me again when you graduated, the year you graduated.
1945.
1945. Okay, and Oakland was quite an amazing new school, wasn't it?
Yeah, and all the parking lots you see there today, that was an archery field with weeds.
Oh,
there was no the only parking was along the main driveway there, and you see, we had gasoline rationing, so you didn't have many people anxious to let their kids drive a car because they couldn't afford it. Yeah.
Any other big differences from the way it is today that you remember?
Well, I remember I was editor of the school paper, which was Blueprint, and we used to, Betty Mae Pfeiffer and I and Herb McLean, we edited the paper and wrote most of the articles. And when I think of it back, we did the best we could with what we had, but you look at one of their papers now, and ours looks like a penny ante stuff. But it was interesting. The most interesting, I think, thing that happened in high school, the United Nations was being formed at that time, and they invited kids that have been active in school papers we got tickets, and we went to what they called the junior gang dinners at the San Francisco Press Club, and that was fun because they had various speakers who were delegates to the United Nations and who came to speak to us, and Spock of Belgium, Carlos Romulo of the Philippines, I'm trying to think of different ones. The guy that was a sculptor, Benny Buffano, he sculptured the black cats for the press club. And so we'd have dinner there and then go home. And it was really fun because we'd attend a session, hear the different people speak. That I remember as being very enjoyable.
Oh, yes. It sounds great. Now, tell me what you did for fun.
Well, we did a lot of swimming at our house. We go in morning, and in the afternoon and evening. Go swimming. And we had chores to do, and we do those, and we had to do those before we could go swimming. But that was always the most fun. We had parties at the pavilion. I remember more than college parties that I had then. And other groups would have, like my cousin went to A to Z, and they had a dance there. So anyhow, it was kind of fun. We had all the things that we needed to keep us busy, swimming and the dance pavilion and that sort of thing.
Did you go to the movies downtown? And wasn't there a drive-in or something not too far from Ocalanas? Not a drive-in movie, but a drive-in
restaurant.
Do you remember?
Yeah, well, that was where Hungry Hunter is now. Now the Hungry Hunter's out of the business. Yeah, but I don't remember. I remember going to some basketball games and stuff.
Did you go to the movie theater downtown?
I don't think the Lafayette theater was in existence. We went to Orinda. I had a friend that worked in the box office, and she would tell me when they were going to have previews. That Hollywood would bring their previews up here to preview them when they were in the theater. And we'd go. I remember seeing Five Graves to Cairo, and different other movies when they were first introduced. Remember one time Bob Hope was there, and so the park theater, to my knowledge, came along later. Because I only remember in that time of going to the El Rey in Walnut Creek and Arena Theater next.
Barbara, did you go to college in this area?
I went to the University of California, Berkeley.
Oh. Did you live on campus? Or?
No, I left at home.
Uh-huh. And how did you get to school?
Well, when I first started, I don't think I was driving then. And I would go with the neighbor as far as Berkeley and then take the trolley towards campus. Then the next thing is that I drove and drove to Berkeley.
Any special memories of your college years that you'd like to share with us? What was your major?
I started out in journalism, and then I went to what they call a regional group major at the time, and it was history and political science and decorative art, which is a strange combination. But believe me, anything in liberal arts, you can use the rest of your life in various ways.
Well, now you told us why your family moved out here, but you have been here a long time, and I know that you raised your family and worked in Lafayette. So could you tell us a little bit about that part of your life?
Let's see, I graduated in 1950 from Cal, and I got married that year, and my husband and I lived on a little cottage here on the grounds for the first 9 years that we were married, and I helped him with an advertising publication that he had, and but he was going to school because he'd been in the service. He'd spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, and so what we did then is he had a late start in getting to his schooling, and so he graduated in 1950, started in 1949, and he graduated in 1951. Got his master's in 53. Then he went back and he got his teaching credential, and he taught from 1957 on.
Uh-huh. And now I know you've been in business as well.
I started in 1971. I decided I needed to help with the education of our kids, and so I started with taking a real estate class, and I got my real estate license in 1971, and then I got my broker's license 2 years later, 73, I think it was. And so from that time until now, I sold real estate.
And you're still doing it, I understand.
Kind of part-time now. It depends on what it is.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes there are certain physical limitations of houses that you could.
Barbara, did you work for a company, or were you on your own? How?
I worked for different companies. I started with a small company in Arena, and then I went to Coldwell Banker, and I was there for 19 and a half years. And then I was with Heritage, and they went out of business, and I was with Pacific Union for a short time. And then I went on my own. And, the business is really totally different than when I first started out.
In what way?
A much friendlier business when I started out. It's much more aggressive, pressure today than it was then.
Did you We're mainly in Lafayette.
Uh,
Focus mainly on Lafayette.
Anywhere people wanted to buy.
Hmm.
Only after you pretty much didn't go out of Central Contra Costa County. For the simple reason that you can't know everything about the property you're selling when you're going out of your area.
Barbara, you've had a long and very wonderful life out here. Tell us some of the biggest changes you've seen in Lafayette.
Well, it's much more of a suburban area than it was then. I mean, it was suburban, but you know, farming, suburban, not like today.
More rural.
Yeah, more rural than it is today, and you get more people who work elsewhere and commute from here, and you get people who are moving in transit, who move here and then move away. There's some people that are still here that have been here a lot of years, as you know, and you always have some people that have been here for a long time. You've been here a long time. How many years for you?
It's about 45 now.
Yes.
Not nearly as long as you. Do you miss anything about the way Lafayette used to be?
Not really. Each thing has each time has its own drawing and stuff. As a kid, we used to hike, go what we call the hangman's tree. And that was a tree that they've now taken down the hill, but we had to go under a fence and up the hill. And we'd take our little lunches in a brown bag and sit up there and eat it. But branches went like this, and they came down, and it was like a bunch of branches. It looked like hangman branches. And that was fun. Well, where are you going? Oh, we're going to Hangman's Street.
Oh, gosh. I know you were involved in quite a few organizations, the Lafayette Historical Society being one way back in the 70s, and were there any other groups that...
I was a charter member of La Miranda AAUW.
Oh.
And let's see. I've been I was active in various board activities. I was 3 times vice president of different councils. And I serve on the professional standards at the present time, which is ethical part of our operation. And do I miss anything? No. You get new people, and they're nice people.
I have one more question, and I don't know. Where do you see Lafayette going in the future? Do you foresee any big changes?
Well, a lot of the major changes, I think, have taken place. You have a ridge line ordinance, so you can't go too high. And the first part was settled was on the flatlands. Then you went in a little higher and a little higher. Now you get to the ridge and there's no place to go. I don't think you'll see a lot more new building. You'll probably see some older ones being torn down and new ones being built. That was the difference in style back in the days when this house was built. This was built in '59. It was typical ranch style. Now you have the bigger, glitzier things, and some of them are still ranch style, but they're also the ones where it's I don't know what style you call them. They're, big, maybe with a tile roof or, just different things. I think we had kind of a fun time growing up. It was, there were pleasant things. We'd have to do our chores, then we'd go swimming, and, we'd take the hikes, stuff like that. The Happy Valley, way back then, they told you, they later got water and stuff in, and you had, the road used to be just gravel, and it was paved road. All the buildings seemed to go up into the higher hills. Mm-hmm. And pretty much, I don't know where it's going in the future. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of development, but hopefully they can provide certain services that they aim to do with the new library, money-wise. Lafayette has lacked a kind of a plan for it. If you go through, you see an awful lot of gas stations. We used to kiddingly call it Gasoline Alley because my mother claimed that the nicest building that was ever built was Colonel Garrett's building. And they tried to, one of the restaurant there's now, that's in that building now, Colonel Garrett, they claimed for a while was the former post office. It was never the post office.
It doesn't look like a post office.
No, post offices are typical boxes. They didn't even need an architecture department. It was just built like topsy. I just rode, But, it's nice out here.
One thing I remember you telling me earlier was that there weren't, in this area now, there's a lot of trees and all.
Oh, yeah.
And you said it was very different when you
Oh, yeah, I can show you a picture. There's nothing on this hill.
It's amazing because it's very wooded now.
But it was bare land. You had to do your own planting.
We saw that a lot. We see that a lot in other areas of Lafayette. And we've lived in the same house too, and trees have grown up around. We used to see the hills. In areas now when we look out, we don't.
We see the deer. I remember another agent was bringing some papers to me one day, and I had 5 big deer in the front yard, and he kind of stared at me. I was so amazed.
Barbara, are there any other stories that you'd like to share with us before we end our talk?
Well, you asked what a couple of stories. Years ago, my brothers we had a cow, and the cow had a calf. And a neighbor who had bought he bought a house that was in Dr. Musser's development off Lafayette. Remember I told you it had been a cattle in there. Anyhow, he had a habit of walking his police dogs. And one of the police dogs jumped the calf. And when it's been mangled or, injured anyway, it no longer cries amber. So he couldn't be shown then. But it was interesting because the man himself was very interesting. Remember we were transporting him back to the Second World War. He came to the area around in the late 30s or early 40s, and he had owned two of the largest newspapers in Berlin, Germany. And he also owned an advertising agency in 27 foreign countries. And he'd take walks with these two police dogs. I don't know whether they were for protection, but he had escaped from Nazi Germany because he wouldn't run his papers the way the Nazis told him to, or wanted him to. And his name was Lochman Moss, and his wife, Carol, ran a nursery school there for a while. Lovely lady. I remember my mother and I went and had tea with her. And she showed me some of the things they were able to bring out, mostly things like pewter milk jars, buckets and stuff type of thing, and miniatures and things like that. So that was an interesting experience. A neighbor who had a life before he came here. And another thing, during the Second World War, I told this to someone and they were surprised, but the pavilion I spoke of earlier was outfitted by the Red Cross as an emergency hospital. And they had beds and stuff in there. It was never used as such, but it was set up to be used during the war years. And those were really different years and did have an impact on the people that lived here, simply because we lived away from stores and we lived away from things, so everything had to be, your gasoline was rationed. And I mentioned that I didn't learn to drive until I was in college, and I learned to drive on a 1941 Lincoln Zephyr, 12 cylinders.
Oh, gosh.
And so, I mean, but, that car during the wartime, we couldn't use it to just drive around because it got 9 miles to the gallon. And so gasoline was a question even then. As it is today, as it's getting to $4 a gallon and some.
Things come around, don't they?
Oh, and then, they had at one time our mail came through Berkeley, California. Our mail was Route 1, Box 552, Berkeley, California. And that was way back earlier. And it's just, things are different, and yet it's interesting to recall them,
Barbara, when did your family sell the house, and did your father do some of the developing? There are other homes now.
No, he sold off to different parcels.
Oh.
And people built their own homes. Now, he retired in the 30s, and he sold late 30s. He sold the cannery to Hamilton Davis, who at one time lived in Alamo or Danville area. And but he never developed anything himself. He retired, and he died in 47.
And did your mother stay in the house?
For a while, and then she sold it.
Uh-huh.
And because it was just too big to keep. It was 3,700 square feet, and that in those days was pretty big. Yeah.
Still is.
Yeah. And a friend, the contractor that built it was a friend of my father's, and he also had built the swimming pool. And the swimming pool was finished on time. It was built before the house was built. But he didn't have the step ladder in, the ladder that goes in. It goes into the pool. He said, don't worry. His name was Ben Cup, K-O-P-F. And he would, I'll get it in. So he came in his bathing suit and dove to the bottom of the pool and set that ladder in there with the bolts. while he was underwater.
Oh, my heavens. Barbara, 3,700 square feet is a big house. Were those all bedrooms, and were there any special rooms?
Just big rooms.
Just big rooms.
Master bedroom and bath and 2 closets. One was with cedar, all cedar lined. And then there was my room, and then there was another room with this kind of sun porch. And then my brothers decided they didn't want the same room, so the one had the porch and one had the other. And then downstairs there was a living room and a dining room and a kitchen and a breakfast room and a laundry room and a half bath and a den.
Must have been a lovely house.
It was.
It probably still is. Yeah. Barbara, thank you so much for sharing. Barbara has a couple more stories that she's going to tell us that we're going to add to this oral history.
Well, I was thinking, Betsy, of a couple of people that were notable. We had a really nice mailman whose name was Mr. Bunker, and he would deliver the mail. As I said earlier, that there was a time when our mail came through Berkeley Post Office. Then, another thing, we had an iceman. You know, we didn't have a lot of electric refrigerators in the old days. And the iceman came, and we kids thought it was really great because we could get to ride up to the gate. We wouldn't do it today now on the running board. And he'd give us a hunk of ice, chip off a piece of ice. And there was also a man who delivered pastries and breads and stuff in his truck. And he actually came by and delivered them. And then there was a vegetable guy. So that we had, you know, different other things that came to us.
Probably had a milkman, too.
Oh, yeah, we had milkman and Williams Dairy. And as I was telling you, Betsy, we later on, Mark and I were partners in real estate. And Mark was the son of one of the Williams. And so it's just, you meet people every so often that have known the area or been around the area that you never knew.
Fun. Okay, thanks.